JDCA has been a critical force for progress in America. You are uniting and lifting up the voices of millions in support of an agenda that is proudly Jewish.
Thank you, JDCA. You mobilized 2 million Jewish voters.
This organization, in a short period of time, has become vital.
At a time of rising bigotry and hate, at a time where we see so much injustice and division, we have to heal this world.
Prepare to vote. Vote like your future depends on it, because it does.
We need change at the top.
Vote Biden.
I'd like to thank the Jewish Democratic Council of America for its strong support of the election of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and other Democrats.
I'm grateful for the ways in which you supported me and stood by me throughout our recent campaign. And I'm very excited about the work that we will do together.
But your support was immensely impactful.
Thank you for having my back.
Deepest gratitude to the Jewish Democratic Council of America. Thank you for all that you did to power us to these 2 historic victories in Georgia.
JDCA is an organization that lives the values of its members.
And the entire team at the Jewish Democratic Council of America just do incredible work to organize our community and further our common goals and make sure that there is a Jewish and democratic voice that is leading in this country.
No one may ever see what you're doing, but you're diligently doing it because you know it really matters. So thank you so much.
Thank you to the JDCA for your leadership. Thank you for your essential work.
We're speaking about our highest ideals, and I'm grateful to the JDCA for adding their voices to that fight.
Our party's values are Jewish values, and our platform is a platform of Tikkun Olam.
And what you stand for is, in my opinion, what the core of who we have to be as a country, which is, yes, jobs, but justice.
I thank you for continuing to be at the forefront of our party's leadership and grassroots activism.
Good evening. My name is Ron Klein. I'm a former congressman and I'm chairman of the Jewish Democratic Council of America. We welcome you and thank you for participating with us and participating with JDCA. I don't know about you, but just listening to those members of Congress the last few minutes and just the personal messages that they gave to us about how we and our interests align with their interests as Democrats. These are some of our leaders in the country, and these are some of the people that you are going to have a chance to talk to when you're doing your virtual lobbying on behalf of JDCA. So we want to welcome you tonight and just thank the fact that there are hundreds and literally thousands of people that have worked with JDCA over the last couple of years that have helped build our platform, our brand, and the excitement of the impact that we had in this last election. And you're going to hear a lot more about it in a few minutes. We now have 16 chapters across the country. These are places where the Jewish vote will and can make a difference, certainly in the next round of elections. People will be fighting for the issues that we care about, and I know that many of us care about so many different things, whether it's combating anti-Semitism and domestic extremism, Israel and support for Israel, voter suppression, gun control, and so many more issues. I want you to take a second right now, and I'm going to hesitate, but just ask you to join the chat and write in the chat where you're from and what issues you care most about. Just take a second and do that. I'm going to continue speaking while you're doing that, but please do it because we're going to assemble that information. It'll be useful to us in terms of what your lead issues are. So tonight we're going to hear from JDCA's CEO, Haley Soifer, about our policy and priorities. We're going to learn exactly how to advocate for these issues during our virtual week of action. And we're also going to be inspired by our keynote speaker, Eve Levinson, a young activist and former policy and government affairs manager at March for Our Lives, who has turned her passion for positive change and Jewish values into real action. So stick around, you're not going to want to miss anything. But first, before we do anything else, I just want to share with you, sort of having been a former member of Congress and sitting on the other side of the table from what you're going to be doing. First of all, I personally can tell you that your personal stories and what you're going to share with the members of Congress means everything. An example of a day in Congress is a member will meet with 20, 30, 40 different groups of people on subject matters from foreign policy to education to jobs, you name it. And the most impactful ones are the ones where people, lobbyists, and we're lobbyists here. We're not paid lobbyists, we're volunteers, but we have a personal connection with that member, either we're from that area or even if we're not, but we're sharing something that they care about. And it's a dialogue. You're going to speak, you're going to hear about how to do this, but I will tell you, you want to make sure you give them a chance to share with you. But your personal stories are the ones that are going to leave them with the most impression. Just a couple of examples. I remember particularly in my district, I'm from South Florida, and in my district, there was a young woman who I knew. She came to see me to talk about how her prescription drugs every month were about $40,000 of cash. Insurance wouldn't cover them. This is for cystic fibrosis, and there's so many other diseases that have the same kinds of problem. And she shared them, and I ended up taking her story to the floor of the House of Representatives to share that story. It was so meaningful to me. It's one of the reasons I took my vote on supporting the the Healthcare Act, the Obamacare, and why it was so important. That was a great example. And then in this day, right now, Parkland, of course, you remember the terrible tragedy in Parkland. Ted Deutsch has talked over and over. He represents that area about how those young students from Parkland High School came to him crying, sharing their moments, their terror, and how it was so essential to do something about it. That happens to be one of our issues as well, and we're going to do that as well. And of course, daily now we're hearing about anti-Semitism, and I've heard from Debbie Wasserman Schultz and the kinds of experience she's hearing from people locally of walking out, wearing a mezuzah, wearing a kippah, being harassed or threatened in the community. These are the stories on the various subjects that we're going to be lobbying on that you're going to talk about and have a real deep impact. So that best comes to best here, they're going to literally take your stories and they're going to retell them to their colleagues in the committees, in the chamber itself, and influence the outcome of which way policy debates go. So I want to thank you for being here tonight. It means so much to all of us that you're participating, you're spreading this message throughout the country to your representatives, your House members and senators. And I just want to thank you again for doing so. So now I'm going to turn it over to JDCA's CEO, Haley Seufer. Haley?
Thank you so much, Ron, and thanks to all of our board members, our next generation leadership council members, our chapter leads who are here, and of course, all of our chapter members. We, over the past 4 years since JDCA was founded in 2017, have truly built a movement. We've seen that movement actually create political change. In 2018, flipping the House from red to blue, and in 2020, first the White House, and then 2 months later, the Senate. And all of you who volunteered with us in this last election played a critical role in making that happen. We want to thank you, and we want to talk about our next steps today. And that is bringing our values, our voices, our votes to those whom we elected in the Congress. And we are so looking forward to our days of action on the Hill the week after next. But some of you are new to JDCA, and we do get questions quite a bit about JDCA and our organization's mission. And so I'm going to give a brief overview of JDCA and how this fits into our days of action on the Hill. So we'll start by just talking about JDCA's origins. So JDCA was founded by Ron and other key board members in 2017 in the immediate aftermath of neo-Nazis marching in our streets in Charlottesville, and a US president equating them with peaceful protesters, saying they're very fine people on both sides. That was truly an inflection point for the Jewish community when we realized, and we knew it in advance of that, but really it was such a clear demonstration that our president and those around him clearly do not share our values. And his policies, his rhetoric, put our community at risk with the emboldening, the amplifying, the alignment, and even the incitement of domestic extremists. We saw years later, January 6th of this year, those extremists, white nationalists and anti-Semites, have the largest attack on our democracy, literally and figuratively, on January 6th, an insurrection attacking our Capitol, but also attempting to stop the peaceful transfer of power. And JDCA exists not only to elect those who share our values, people like Joe Biden and our leadership in the Senate and the House and our Democratic caucuses, but also to ensure that our voices as Jewish Democrats continue to be heard and that the Democratic Party continues to align with Jewish values. We have this image in the middle here of JDCA members marching against anti-Semitism in New York earlier last year. This was a critical moment. And of course, at this moment, even after the election, our work is not done. In fact, it is more important than ever as we have seen the rise of anti-Semitism, as we've seen the rise of domestic extremism, and as our democracy continues to be under attack. So that truly is the impetus for our Hill Days, and those will be largely the issues that we will bring to the Hill. So JDCA's advocacy, both in terms of what we will be lobbying on during our Hill Days, but also our agenda in general, our policy agenda is aligned with the views and the values of Jewish Americans and Jewish Democrats. We know, based on Pew Research that was recently made public just last month, that Jews are overwhelmingly Democrats. We consider ourselves to be pro-Israel. We also know that that over half of Jews, at the same time as being pro-Israel, are critical of at least some of the policies of the current Israeli government. And just as we can be strong American patriots, and certainly we were critical of the policies of the Trump administration, so too can we be strongly pro-Israel and at times question the policies of the Israeli government. But we are focused largely on domestic policy issues. And front and center has been the rise of extremism and anti-Semitism that our community knows has dramatically increased in the past 5 years, and over half of us feel less safe than we did before Donald Trump took office. We are going to be advocating on domestic and foreign policy issues, and the first one will be support of Israel. We saw this support in action in terms of the vital assistance that was provided, but in terms of the Iron Dome, as Israel was under attack by terrorists launched rockets from Gaza. The Iron Dome saved countless Israeli lives in intercepting those rockets. So this will be one issue that we will bring to the Hill. Another will be the assault on our democracy. And this is the way that we have framed it, that the battle for the soul of our nation may have started with neo-Nazis marching in Charlottesville. Certainly that is not only what led to the creation of JDCA, but also we know that was an impetus for Joe Biden for running for president. But now it's moved to every state legislature challenging our right to vote. There are 48 states where there has been proposed legislation to suppress the right to vote. Over 400 laws have been introduced. A handful of them have been enacted. And there is litigation going on to try to block this, but far more effective than trying to litigate every law would be the passage and enactment of HR 1. And many of you have heard about it, and we will discuss it even further momentarily. Sheer, our policy director, is going to talk about it, but that is something we are going to bring to the fore when we go to the Hill, that advocating for passage of this critical legislation that will protect our democracy and our right to vote, as well as ensuring that redistricting is done by nonpartisan commissions. This is critical, and we have talked about it repeatedly as a Jewish value, protecting the right to vote, protecting our democracy, and protecting our elections. Now, I was like Ron, I was not a member of Congress, but I did spend some time on the Hill. I worked for 4 members of Congress, and I wanted to provide some tips for what I think allows for the most effective forms of advocacy. The first is as you prepare to go to the Hill, we will definitely be providing you talking points. So you will know the issues that you're going to discuss. And doing it virtually actually provides another opportunity to have those talking points, right in front of you on your computer. You'll know the issues. But it's important that they also get to know you. So introducing yourself and introducing JDCA as the voice of Jewish Democrats throughout the country, and we will provide talking points on that as well. I think it's important that you give a personal connection as well. And this is something that you all should think about for your own advocacy, whether it's a connection to Israel or to the domestic policy issues that we will discuss, such as the importance of protecting our democracy. Perhaps you're in one of the 48 states, chances you are, where there has been proposed legislation to suppress your vote. This is certainly something that's important to make somewhat personal for you with a story, perhaps. Brevity is important, but if I were to specifically talk about the importance of the Iron Dome, I would talk about my visiting Iron Dome batteries and talking to those IDF soldiers who showed me these batteries and talked about the decision that's made as to whether or not to intercept those missiles in less than a second. Those personal stories are really important to have a lasting impact on the member or the staff. And now for staff. As a former staffer, I think I may be biased, but most of you, we have definitely been asking for meetings with members, but some of you will be meeting with staff. In some cases, it will be a combination. We'll have both the staff and the member, but we want to emphasize the importance of congressional staff. They really are key to making everything in Congress happen. It may be rather obvious, but we want to just convey the importance of the staff, and you inevitably, whether there's a member in these meetings or not, will be engaging with congressional staff and not to be overlooked. I think it's also important to show your appreciation. We are going to be meeting with Democrats. Obviously, there are a range of views within our party, and there will be a range of views for the members that you meet with. But I'm sure in our advocacy agenda, we can find at least one issue, if not many, where there will be total alignment between the advocacy agenda and the positions of the senator or representative that you'll be meeting with. And it's important to acknowledge that and express appreciation. And the final point that I would say that's important is to express your view as representing the views of your community, of their community, and the importance of emphasizing that you are a constituent, and that this is the view of whatever community, state, district you're coming from. That this is the view of Jewish Democrats in this area, and really bringing it home for them in terms of that this is the view of their constituents. It does matter, as Ron said. It's something that perhaps matters more than people realize. That one of the roles of staff is to actually tally the input that they get from constituents, whether it's phone calls or letters or emails or meetings like this. And it does matter, especially as those views and voices continue to add up advocating for a specific position. So your voice matters. It's certainly going to matter that day when we go to the Hill. And, it's important to remind these folks that this is the view of those whom they were elected to represent. So with that, I'm honored to turn it over to our political and policy director, Shir Atias, to talk about our legislative agenda. Shir.
Great. Thank you so much, Haley. And thank you again to everyone who has joined us here today and who will be joining us on the Hill and in further meetings. We're so excited you all are joining us and are so grateful for your activism and your work. I'm excited to share our legislative agenda that Haley so wonderfully previewed for us. And as Haley mentioned, we'll be sending detailed materials to ensure you are all prepared. And my colleague Jonathan later in the evening will give you the details on how to ensure those all get in your hands and you are well prepared for these meetings. As has been mentioned, we'll be discussing 3 central issues in these meetings. These issues, while they certainly are not the only issues that we are passionate about, and you all have shown the wide range of issues you care so deeply about in the chat, it's been wonderful to see. While these aren't the only issues that JDCA and that us as Jewish Democrats care about, we do believe and we are excited that this is an effective agenda. We are excited to be taking it to the Hill, and we are confident that JDCA, that you all as JDCA grassroots activists offer a unique and valued voice on these issues. And we're very excited to be elevating them on Capitol Hill. They are, as you can see here, combating anti-Semitism, domestic terrorism, and white supremacy, protecting our democracy and voting rights, and supporting Israel's security and the compliance for compliance approach to re-entering the Iran nuclear deal. On combating anti-Semitism, domestic terrorism, and white supremacy, we know that the Department of Homeland Security, under both the Trump administration and the Biden administration, has put out repeated warnings that domestic terrorism and violent white nationalism is the #1 and foremost threat to Americans, and especially American Jews. Especially as we've seen and Ron talked about at the beginning, the rise in anti-Semitism in the latest tick over the last few weeks. This is an issue of extreme importance to the Jewish community, and we're proud to be advocating upon it. Just a few weeks ago, the No Hate Act, which passed as part of the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, was passed. And we're so grateful that the House, the Senate, and of course, President Biden for signing this into law. It will create significant progress in the area of hate crime reporting, and we are looking forward to advocating for further steps to strengthen the federal government's actions against anti-Semitism, domestic terrorism, and white supremacy on the Hill. First is the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. This is an act introduced in the House by Representative Brad Schneider of Illinois and Senator Durbin of Illinois, which strengthens the federal government's prevention efforts, responses to, and investigations of domestic terrorism. It also creates offices in the Department of Homeland Security, in the FBI, and in the Department of Justice that are singularly and uniquely dedicated to the issue of domestic terrorism. Second, we'll be lobbying on behalf of enacting social media reforms to ensure that anti-Semitism, that right-wing nationalism, that conspiracy theories, which we know thrive in online spaces, are combated, and that social media companies are held accountable for it. One such piece of legislation that does that is this piece of legislation written here on the slides, Protecting Americans from Dangerous Algorithms Act. This is Representative Tom Malinowski of New Jersey's bill, and we're looking forward to advocating on behalf of this and enacting social media reforms writ large to combat anti-Semitism and extremism. And finally, we'll be emphasizing to our members that we are meeting with and thanking them for their moral leadership and their efforts to hold elected officials accountable and to call out anti-Semitism whenever and wherever it occurs. Next, we'll be talking about protecting our democracy. As many of you know, and as Haley discussed, Republicans have launched a concerted effort to attack our democracy, with over 389 bills introduced in 48 different states that restrict voting rights. The solution to this is clear. You've heard about it a lot, and we will be advocating on behalf of it, and it is the For the People Act. This bill has passed the House, and we must have it pass the Senate and have Joe Biden sign this into law. Of course, Some of these important provisions includes making voter registration easier, expanding voting rights, restoring the Voting Rights Act, and through authorization of the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act, and more. It's important to recognize, and we'll be saying this with our senators, that as it stands, it is impossible to pass this bill without reforming the filibuster. Now, we know there's lots of other bills that the filibuster is in the way of as well, whether it's gun violence prevention legislation, whether it's immigration reform, etc. And we will be advocating on behalf of removing this tool, which is holding us back from passing this critical legislation of the For the People Act, which will protect our democracy. And finally, we'll be advocating on behalf of our values of support for Israel. This means supporting full funding to Israel per the 2016 Obama-Biden Memorandum of Understanding, supporting Israel's right to self-defense, supporting humanitarian aid to Palestinians in accordance with existing US law, and finally, supporting the compliance for compliance approach, which is the approach that President Biden and Secretary Blinken have proposed and are working on to re-entering the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and ensuring that Israel's safety and security is continued. Again, we're so grateful to all of you for being here, for taking this legislative agenda to the Hill. I'm confident that all of you will make the difference on these issues and highlight our values to members of Congress. Thanks so much.
JDCA is so focused. JDCA is strategic, and there's no waste of energy. When you work with JDCA, they go into the battleground states, they select races that they believe that they can harness the Jewish vote. They select candidates who support our Jewish values, and then these candidates become members of the House, senators, and even a president.
JDCA is a natural home for me because I love political advocacy and political activism. And of course, I want to ensure that Democrats are elected and re-elected to Congress, to the House, to the Senate.
We took to the streets, we organized, we protested, we raised money, and we voted. And we made a difference. And for many of us, that was a feverish work that took us day and night through the last 4.5 years. This spirit is what paved the work that all of you and us are doing together here. And I believe that this spirit has to be our blueprint moving forward.
I began as an organizing fellow during the 2020 general election and then continued phone banking through the Georgia runoff election as well. And I saw firsthand the impact that JDCA made across the nation. As an Ashkenazi and Latina organizer, I'm so proud to be part of JDCA, an organization that is committed to advocating for Jewish and democratic values.
So I want to champion JDCA and give not only my hechsher, but my gratitude. Thank God for the work we are committed to doing as a New York chapter of the JDCA. This launch matters. It matters in countless ways. And thank God all of you showed up, and you're going to tell your friends all about why this is important.
Good evening. My name is Michael Rosenzweig. I'm proud to serve on the National Board of JDCA, and I'm also very proud to be chair of our Outreach Committee. And I'd like to take just a couple of minutes to talk about this week of action, particularly in the context of the outreach work that we do at JDCA. You know, stripped to its essentials, JDCA's work really focuses on two components. One is advocacy, the other is voter mobilization. At JDCA, as I think most of you know, we advocate for Jewish and Democratic Party values and policies that are consistent with those values. And we endorse candidates who share those values and support those policies, and we mobilize Jewish voters to get them elected. At the heart of both of these components are you, our 16 chapters, and our many, many volunteers. You, all the hundreds of you who've signed up for this week of action, because without your active engagement, without your commitment, we simply could not realize our mission. So first and foremost, thank you. A heartfelt thank you to you, all of you, for what you did in 2020 and for what you're about to do in 2022 and in this week of action. Now, let me say a word about the week of action. Let me say a word about the week of action. This week of action on which we're about to embark is at the very least at the heart of what we do. So in addition to recognizing for its own sake the importance of the advocacy that you will be doing with your members of Congress and thereby advancing our policy priorities, we also see this week as a vehicle for reminding all of us of how important your commitment and engagement are as we approach 2022, the 2022 midterms. You did amazing work in 2020, and the results were incredible and gratifying. JDCA made a critical difference in the 2020 elections and made a critical difference in helping Democrats keep the majority in the House and take control of the Senate and, of course, the White House. But 2022 will be even more challenging than what we faced in 2020. And we know this for sure. We simply cannot fail in 2022. The stakes are simply too high. So think of this week of action not only as a week of action to advance our policy priorities in the advocacy work that you're doing with your members of Congress, but also think of it as a kickoff event for the advocacy and voter mobilization work that we will be calling on all of you to do as we approach 2022. So again, thank you for all that you've done, and thank you for what you are about to do. With that, it's my pleasure to hand this off to Deborah Stein, our Arizona chapter lead. Deborah.
Thank you, Michael. It's my honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, Eve Levinson. Despite her young age, Eve is an experienced and world-class advocate. As Federal Affairs Manager and Public and Government Affairs Manager for March for Our Lives, Eve led over a dozen lobbying days and trained hundreds of advocates on how to lobby in person and virtually. During the 2020 election cycle, she worked with the Biden-Harris campaign's Youth and Progressive Engagement Coalition, helping to coordinate an operation that made 5 million calls into swing states. She's currently pursuing a BA in Political Science and a Master's in Public Administration at George Washington University, while also leading the Youth and Gov Coalition's push for increased representation of young Americans in the Biden administration, and continuing her work with Grassroots Democrats HQ to help power the blue wave. Eve's advocacy, leadership, and tireless work ethic is an inspiration to all of us, and it's a privilege to have her here with us. And now I'll turn it over to you, Eve.
Thank you so much to Deborah and the whole JDCA team and staff for having me here today. I'm so excited to be here virtually with the community that brings together so many things that I value so much. And as somebody who is a Jewish Democrat and brings those Jewish values to all of the advocacy work I've done, I'm so thankful for the space that JDCA creates for other advocates to be able to find that home where we can identify proudly as Jewish Democrats. Judaism has been key to my activism from as young an age as I can remember, and I was really taught to see my Jewish faith as really key to efforts to make the world a better place. And really my work, specifically getting involved in policy, started when I was in middle school. In 7th grade, I was in a global studies class, and I felt like every day I was just learning about something else horrible that was happening in the world, and the point of it was just like to teach us what was going on. I was not very happy with that because I wanted to do something. So clearly I was an activist, which luckily I ended up finding a home for later. But so I was lucky enough that in that same year in my Hebrew school, an organization, Jewish World Watch, came and made a presentation about what people could do in America, in the United States, no matter their age, no matter what they do for a living, to be able to help make a difference in preventing and minimizing the effects of genocide and mass atrocities happening across the world. And this for me was really my aha moment. I was like, this is what I can do to make a difference. And so I got really involved with Jewish World Watch and with the anti-genocide movement, both in Los Angeles and then nationally, and got to lobby for the first time when I was 15, which was an incredible experience. And what I learned when I was sitting there in Representative Ted Lieu's office with a number of other advocates in a similar meeting to what you all will be doing this month, was I saw firsthand how Representative Liu cared so much about what we were saying. And it was, in fact, because we weren't the typical lobbyists that were sitting there. And I saw how he cared and he listened and his ears sort of perked up, per se, more when I was talking about why I cared about the issue than necessarily when the one staffer who was there who knew the policy specifics had it down really key. And seeing that and seeing how important and valuable hearing from his constituents was to the representative, to who this day is still a great representative in Congress who continues to listen to his constituents, really shaped my view of how important it was for us as advocates to go and take our demands and take our requests directly to the people who have that power. I then got to continue to do lobbying work in addition to other organizing work in the anti-genocide movement, and actually got to travel to DC for a conference where I met with Haley, who was then a staffer for my senator, or former Senator Vice President Harris, and got to see again the same thing, that whether it's the member that you're meeting with or the staffer who's making the decisions, that they want to hear from those people, and being able to make those connections is really important. And I will just add one other thing, that if you happen to be meeting with a staffer who has a connection to the Jewish community, there are a lot of them. I've had so many meetings with various people who, whether it's that they went to the same summer camp that I went to, or were a part of the Hillel at GW, that connection and leaving that reminder made that difference. And that happened when I met with Haley when she was a staffer, and with so many others. So I'll just add that extra tidbit to the training that happened. But so throughout my journey of this policy advocacy, I moved to DC in fall of 2018. And around that time was when I was getting more involved in the gun violence prevention movement, because that was right around in the year after the tragic Parkland shooting. And what I saw a lot of was a lot of my friends and a lot of advocates were protesting outside of the halls of power, but they were right there. The Capitol was right there. The people would walk on their way to work, but there wasn't always the understanding among activists, particularly younger activists, that it was our right and that we should be going inside the halls of power and not just protesting from the outside, but trying to work with, especially our allies on the Democratic side of the aisle, on the inside to push for what activists and advocates and constituents want. And at the same time, I was interning with Senator Feinstein. And so I saw from the inside the importance of constituents and advocates doing it. When Haley was talking about that tallying, a lot of times it's college students, probably some of them are my classmates, that are sitting there tallying all of the constituent outreach that's coming in, because that's what they need for the higher up staffers to be able to make those decisions. And so what I did, because I saw this discrepancy, was I really felt the need to help figure out how to get more of those advocates involved in the policymaking process. And so that's what I spent a lot of my time doing for the last few years in the gun violence prevention movement, was how do we bridge the gap between the people that work at these organizations and are sitting there writing policy briefs and memos and are paid lobbyists doing that work, and how do we make sure that these activists and advocates, and where the gun violence prevention movement, specifically the young survivors, how their voices could be heard when we keep on saying how important there is. And what we saw is that that makes a difference in passing this legislation. If you look at gun violence prevention, which that sort of legislation is key to combating domestic terrorism, we saw that it had been progress in it had been stalled for so long, literally for my entire lifetime. And then when we saw the uptick in energy around it that was led by grassroots activists since the Parkland shooting, we saw so much progress on the federal level. We saw hearings being held for the first time in over a decade. We saw funding for research. It previously wasn't even allowed for the CDC and NIH to research causes and solutions to gun violence getting solved there. We saw the House pass gun reform to expand background checks, and none of that would have been possible without that pressure from the outside and without activists like us all going and taking the fight directly to Congress. And that's what I've heard time and time again from people who work on the Hill who talk about that. And so if there's one thing I want to leave you with, is just that I have been lucky enough to get to do a lot of policy advocacy at a really young age. And every single time what I've seen is that people want something different to shake it up. And that difference is us. It's us going in and telling our personal stories, explaining why this matters to our Jewish community, explaining the stories of those who might not be able to make the meetings, to make it memorable, because otherwise these people are just there all day reading through the same policy documents. And it's so important to do this also right now as folks who were involved in the election, because it's not just something we need to do every once in a while. We need to continuously have that engagement. And so it's both about helping to hold accountable the people that we helped elected, but also with the legislation you all will be talking about related to the For the People Act. It's about helping to ensure elections will be protected so that we can elect people in the future who will continue to listen to us and continue to live up to our values. And so I'm so excited that you all are going to get to do this. As I said when I was talking to the team before, I hope that the one part of this COVID era that stays is keeping advocacy this accessible, because to be able to have this many people talking to legislatures and talking to their staff is going to be so powerful in a way that will get their attention that might not have happened in person. And I can't wait to see the impact you'll make. And thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Eve, for energizing us and inspiring us before we begin this critical work over the next few weeks. My name is Jonathan Allen, and I serve as the chapter's director and outreach manager here at JDCA. And I'm so excited to get the opportunity to work with all of you, to work with our state chapters on a day-to-day basis. And I really want to thank again everyone who took the time this evening to be with us, and want to emphasize, similar to Eve, my first involvement in politics was through a Hill Days effort. And it's never too early or too late to get involved. When I'd first joined that Hill Day, the ability to speak to members of Congress, have them hear me, and know that I was impacting legislation that would affect millions, both in the US and around the world, left me so with a desire to continue to do this work, that I'd switched my field and decided I would stick to politics and continue to do so professionally. And so I just want to outline for everyone what the next steps will look like after today's kickoff. And so over the next week, we'll have several meetings, state-specific meetings, to give all of you the opportunity to meet with one another, get to know the participants of these meetings before you go into the meetings with the members of Congress. Additionally, that'll give you all the opportunity to ask any questions, ensure you're prepared, understand the agenda, and can ask staff any questions and are comfortable before you go into the meetings with members. And finally, the third week of June, the week of the 14th, we'll take our voices to the Hill, meet with members of Congress across the country, and embark in these exciting efforts. And so in the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to our staff at outreach@jewishdems.org. We'll be following up with several policy materials and information to ensure you all feel prepared and have the information you need, whether it's voting records, information on all the bills my colleague Sheer had mentioned, letters that all of these members have signed onto, and their stances on the various issues. We'll have all that material in your inbox shortly, but feel free again to reach out to staff. We're very excited and thankful that you'll be joining us. And I'll now pass it back to our CEO, Haley Soifer, to wrap us up for tonight.
Great. Well, thank you all. As of Friday, I guess tomorrow, it marks 3 years since I, the first employee of JDCA, started in this position. And the most gratifying part of this job, which grows, I think, even more gratifying each day, is to see the growth of this organization. What started as a hope and a wish to impact elections not only has impacted elections thanks to all of you, but also truly is pushing a specific agenda that is aligned with our values. And to see the evolution of the chapters move from the phone banking and text banking that all of you did with us, 4,400 of you did with us around the elections and the Georgia runoff, and now to take our voices to the Hill is wonderful to see, but even more important, it will continue to have an impact. So we're very excited for this next stage of our work. We rely entirely on our supporters, on all of you, to help amplify these voices, our values, and to join us. And we look forward to ensuring you're prepared to go virtually to the Hill. I appreciated what Eve said in terms of this really being very inclusive. We welcome anyone who wants to join us. So if you have others to bring along with you in your community who might be interested in getting involved in JDCA, invite them to come along. It's a matter of the same way you joined tonight. It's getting on a Zoom. So in the same way that we found ways to organize and even vote more accessibly in this last election, now we are advocating even more accessibly with a Zoom link. So we're looking forward to it, and we know that it will make a difference. So thank you all for being here. As Jonathan said, we will follow up with you with details, including your state-specific meeting to discuss your chapter's views, and do think about those stories. I saw that Bob, I believe it was Bob Schloss, recently wrote, the members are storytellers themselves. That's absolutely true. Every member of Congress is you probably know some of their stories by heart, those who have told them hundreds of times. But think about your story as you prepare to advocate, and which issue, maybe there was one, maybe it was all three, really speaks to you and where you have that connection. And that is specifically the story, the voice, and the values that we hope you'll bring with us to the Hill when we have our days of action. So thank you. And we hope you all have a good night. We look forward to being in touch, and we're ending 10 minutes early, which is very uncharacteristic of JDCA, but we hope you enjoy a slightly longer evening. So we're going to end shortly. Thank you so much. Here are some dates. Great, thank you.